Oh, hi, Steve Gale here. In this video, what we're going to do is I'm going to demonstrate how to set up a Raspberry Pi ready for developing applications, embedded applications using Flask and I2C bus. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get our Raspberry Pi and image it. And the way I did that was I used the Raspberry Pi imager. And I just choose the recommended operating system. The next thing you would do is choose the storage. I haven't got storage mounted, but I'd select a storage drive, which would have an SD card installed. And 16 gig was the size that I used. And then what you would do is you would go through the process of writing the operating system to the SD card image. Once that's completed, then the next thing to do is to connect up your Raspberry Pi, power it up, and go through its initial configuration phase. So in the initial configuration phase, and we've got some documentation here on how to do that for Windows, so I'll just bring that up, and we'll have a look at it. So in the split the screen out. If we look at the initial configuration, and here it talks about how to set up in this documentation here, it talks about using the Raspberry Pi imager and burning the operating system onto the SD card. Once we've done that, then the next thing we want to do, and we'll go and find the Windows instructions. Install the image in Windows. There's some Windows instructions here, and then the next thing we would do is we need to connect up a display. So connect up a HDMI cable to a display, and also you need to connect, once you've connected that, you need to also connect a keyboard and a mouse, and then power up the Raspberry Pi and boot it. You'll go through an initial on-screen prompts where you'll select the country, the language, and the time zone, and then confirm that the screen display is displaying correctly. The next step is to do a Wi-Fi search, and what you'll do is it will give you a list of all of the SSIDs that it can identify, and you can select the appropriate Wi-Fi SSID for the access point that you want to provide internet access to the Raspberry Pi, and enter the password associated with that Wi-Fi SSID. And once that's connected, then you can go through and update the software. So this will prompt you, it'll prompt you to do a software update where you can download the updates, and that'll take a while to download the updates, and then it will install the updates. And this is the equivalent of doing a apt-get update, apt-get upgrade, and then it will do a restart. So once the Pi restarts, what we want to do is we want to open up a terminal. And when we've got that terminal, we want to allow so that we can SSH into the Pi. So we'd say sudo syscontrol enable SSH. And what that will do is that will give us the ability to SSH into the Pi. And then sudo system control start SSH. And once we do that, then from then on, we don't need our HDMI screen, our keyboard, and our mouse. We can just SSH into the box and into the Raspberry Pi, and then configure it from there. So I'm going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my PuTTY client, and my Pi is at 10.00.67, and I'm going to use port 22. So I'm going to open that and just say yes to this, and I'm going to log in as Pi, and I'll provide my password. And enter, and then we can see that we've logged into the Raspberry Pi. So once we've logged into the Pi, I'll just see if I can make the settings, make the text a bit bigger. Let's have a look. window appearance. I'll just pause for a minute. So I'm going to change the font setting. So I'll change it from 10 point to let's try 16 point. That's a bit more readable, and apply. And so now we can see here. So I'm into what I've done is I'm into my Raspberry Pi. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look and see what we need to do next. So you can see I've sudo system control enable SSH because we've been able to SSH and the SSH engine is started. So if I do an IPA, then I can have a look at my IP address. You can see here wireless LAN 0. My wireless IP address is 10.0.0.67. So the next thing I want to do is once I've SSH'd into it, is I want to install XRDP. Now I've already done this, but what we'll do is we'll execute this command. So I'll just copy that and then paste that into there. And you'll see that XRDP is already at the latest version. But that will install our RDP. That'll install XRDP so that we can use a Windows RDP client to remote desktop into the Raspberry Pi. So the next thing we want to do is start the service. Now I've already got the service started, but this is something that you would do. So I'll copy that and I'll execute that. And that will start the RDP service if it's not already started. Mine's currently started. So once I've done that, then what I can do is I can start my RDP client. Now I can do this one of two ways. If this is in the path, if Windows, you can execute this from the command line. So, or you can just run up your Windows RDP client. I'm just going to execute this from the command line. So I'll just copy that, and I'll just type this into here and hit enter. That didn't work. Okay, so we'll try again with the correct port number. So the port number for RDP is 3389. So what we're going to do is going to copy this and we're going to put it into here, and we'll see if we can kick off our RDP client from the command line on port 3389. And yeah, so far so good. So it's saying, can it be verified? Do you want to connect anyway? We'll say yes. We'll say, don't ask me again for this computer. And so what I can do is I can log into my Raspberry Pi using my username Pi and my password. Password and username, password that we set up when we did the first install of the Raspberry Pi. And then I should now have my remote desktop. Okay, so we've got our remote desktop. And what we're going to do is we're just going to open up a command prompt here, and I'll see if I can increase the screen resolution. So yeah, so we can increase the size of the text display by going into Edit, Preferences, and selecting the terminal font. So I've set the font to 14 on the terminal, so you can see here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to do a sudo apt update and just check that we've got the latest versions of all software on our repository. And this would have been updated by the updater, but this is something that it's good to get into the habit of doing regularly. So all packages are up to date. So we do, if they weren't, we do a sudo apt upgrade to upgrade any repositories that weren't up to date. But because everything's up to date, we don't need to do that. So let's have a look at what we're up to next. So I'll just bring this screen to here, and then drag this one over to here. So we've got our RDP client, and probably the next thing we want to do is we probably would be a good idea to install Visual Studio Code. So the command I'm going to do, I'm going to install it from app repository. So the command I'm going to use for this is sudo apt install code -y. And let's do that. Yep. We'll try that again with a proper minus. So sudo apt install code -y, and click in that window and hit enter. And then it's going to install Visual Studio Code for us. So that'll take a little while. I'll just pause it while it's going. Okay, so now the Visual Studio Code has finished installing. The next thing we're going to do is to make sure that Git is installed. It should be installed by default, but let's just run this command and just check that Git is installed. And you can see here is that Git is already at the newest version. So so that's fine. So we've got, at this point, we've got Visual Studio Code installed and we've got Git installed. So the next thing we want to do is clone our repository. Now, how you go about cloning your repository will depend on whether it's a public or a private repository. If it's a public repository, you can just clone it. So you can just type in git clone, and the path to the repository, I'll just say xxx.git, and what that will do is it'll create a folder of that repository name, and then you can work in that folder. Because I'm cloning a private repository, the methodology I will use will be slightly different. So what I've done is I've cloned into my repository, which is called solarhvac.git. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change directory to that. So if I do an ls-l, or if I just do an ls, and what we'll see is I've got this folder, which is my the repository that I've cloned. So what I'm going to do is just going to change directory to that. And then I'm just going to type code dot, because this is if I do a ls -sale, what you'll see is that it's a Git repository. See, it's got a .git folder. So it's actually my GitHub repository. So if I type in code dot, and what that'll do is that'll run up Visual Studio Code, and that'll run up Visual Studio Code in my cloned repository. So we've got Visual Studio Code running up now for the first time, and I'll just say yes, I trust the authors. And here's my clone project, which is available in Visual Studio Code. So let's have a look at what extensions we might need. So we've got no extensions installed. So at this point, what you would do is you would go about installing extensions. Really, the only extension I need at the moment is the Python extension. So I'll just install the Python extension, because the project work I'm going to do is going to be related to Python, and that will go through and that'll install the Python extension. So we can have a look now, and we should see that. So what we've got is we've got Python installed, PyLance, and looks like Jupyter Notes and Jupyter Notebook stuff's been installed as well. So the next thing we want to do is we want to open a terminal. So I'll just go terminal, new terminal, and you can see we're in the Solar HVAC. So rather than having to have a terminal, I can just use this as my terminal window. So one of the things I need to do is I need to install any Python libraries that my project needs to use, whatever your project may be. But because what we're looking at is running a Flask project, we'll need to install Flask and make sure that Flask is installed for Python. So let's do that now. I'm just going to rearrange my windows a bit. Stretch this out, make this a bit bigger. And what we're going to do is we're going to install Flask using pip, but I might just go to edit and preferences, if I can remember where I'll have a look at this and I'll just make the text, the terminal text, a little bit larger. Okay, so I found that it's in file settings, features, terminal, integrated font size, and I've just made that a little bit bigger so that it's more readable, font size of 18. So what we're going to do now is we're going to install Flask. So I'm going to just run pip install Flask. So I'll copy that and paste that in there. And we can see here that it's already installed, but it's for Python 2.7. So we want to run Python 3. So what we need to do is we need to just alter our command just a little bit to make sure that we're running it with Python 3. So the command we'll use is Python 3 -m pip install Flask, and that'll make sure that we've got Flask installed for Python 3. And you can see here that requirement is already satisfied. So yeah, so it's already installed. Maybe what we need to do is make sure that we've got the latest version. So we might just do an upgrade and make sure that we've got the latest version of Flask. So by adding the -- upgrade, what we can do is we can make sure that we've got the latest version of Flask installed. So you can see when I run this command, I install Ginger2 302, markup works 202, Flask 202. It's dangerous 201, typing extensions and zip. So that means that I've got the latest version, that I'm running with the latest production version of Flask by using Python 3 -m pip install -- upgrade Flask, and that will give me what I want. Okay, so once I've got all my dependencies installed, then what I can do is I can run my app. So in the case of my app, it's this one here. So what I can do is I can just right-click this and I can just say run Python file in terminal. And this will commence running you can see here, it's using Python 3 and it's running my app. And you can see here, oh, I've got permission denied. So I actually have to run it as sudo. So what I need to do is I just need to bring that up arrow and then go back here and just put sudo in front of that. And then I can run my app and I'll have permission to run my app. And you can see here that what it's doing is it's running up the Flask development server, and my Flask development server is running. So now what I can do is if I want to test my app, then I can go to my app and I can just confirm that my app is running correctly. So I can either do that locally using the web browser here, localhost :80, or alternatively, because this is 0000, in other words, what I'm doing is I'm making this available, then I should be able to run this if I know my IP address, which is 10.0.0.67. So I should be able to bring up a browser window, pop it over here, http://10.0.0.67, and my port is port 80. If you're using 5000 or the default port, you need to change that to 5000. But if I just do that, then I should be able to hit my app. And you can see here's my app running, which my app, what it does is, without going into the detail, is it goes to my solar array and has a look at how much energy is being generated, has a look at how much energy my house is using, which is here, and then tells me how much I'm pumping back to the grid. So this app is running on my Raspberry Pi. Okay, so let's say we want to make a change to our project and we want to rerun it. So let's have a look at how we can do that. So let's just hit Control-C there and close that. So let's go over here and make a change. So I've made a change here, not to the code, but I've just made a change to my documentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stage that. This is in Windows, and I'm going to commit those changes. Updated documentation, and I'll commit that change, and I'll push that change into my repository. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to, and I'll make this full screen. I'm going to go back into here, and I could go to do it a couple of ways. I can do a git pull from Visual Studio Code, or alternatively, I can do a git pull from the command line. Let's do it from the command line first. So let's go in here and run up a new terminal window. And I'll just do an ls here. And I'll just change directory to my project. And I'll just do a git pull. And you can see here what it's done is it's brought in the change. So I've only got one file that's changed. But if this were, and this is just the readme.md file, but if I'd changed my .py file or any of the other files that I was using in the project, then by doing a git pull in my repo directory, then I can pull in any changes. So then what I can do is I can then in Visual Studio Code, if I want to, I can go into Visual Studio Code and I can rerun that command, which is the command for rerunning my app. Or alternatively, what I might want to do is I might want to set it up as a cron job. And the benefits of setting it up as a cron job is that it gets run every time the Raspberry Pi reboots. So if your Raspberry Pi loses power and then runs up again, then it'll automatically, as a cron job, you can set it up to automatically rerun your application. So let's have a look at how we might do that. So I might just minimize that again and bring back to my documentation, which has the how to do it in there. Actually, I've also got that in here. So let's maybe go into my readme.md file and have a look at how we can do this. So I'll split this out. I'll put this over here. And I'll put this over here. Make this a bit bigger. And okay, so what I want to do is I want to use this crontab -e. So let's go into here and let's say I'll just use that command. Oops, not that one. Crontab -e. And I've got to select an editor. So I'll just use Nano. So I'll just put one in there. And what I need to do is I need to put this command in here, which is reboot sudo python 3 home pi. This is my repository directory, and this is the file. This is my Flask app, And I'm going to put an ampersand on the end so it runs in the background. And this is on reboot. So every time the Raspberry Pi reboots, it's going to rerun my my Flask app. Yep. So I'm going to go down here, and I just need to add this in. So I'll just copy that there, and I'll paste that in there, and just Control X for nano, save modified buffer, yes, and write it to the cron tab, to where I want to write it, and quit. So now if I was to do a reboot and reboot my Raspberry Pi, then my app would come up automatically running in the background. And what I could do is I could do a PS, a process, to have a look at the process ID of that app. So sudo reboot now would be the way that you could get that running. But before I do, I've got one more thing that I want to do, and that's I want to enable I2C. This particular project I'm using doesn't use I2C, but if you are using I2C, you might want to enable I2C. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to go into here, and we're going to go into Preferences, and we're going to go to Raspberry Pi Configuration, and we're going to go to Interfaces, and you can see here I've got I2C. So I'm going to enable I2C and hit OK. And that will enable I2C usage. So if I was writing an I2C project, then I could then use I2C. The other thing I'll do is I'll actually install some of the I2C tools. So I'm going to do a sudo apt install -y I2C tools tools. And my I2C tools are installed. And finally, I can, if I had any I2C devices, I can use I2C detect. I don't have any, but let's run it anyway. -y1 is I2C bus 1. And you can see here there's nothing there, but basically what this is this is my I2C addresses. So 0, 0, 0, 0, 10, 1, 11, 21, that's 22, 36 would be there. So if I had any I2C devices installed, they would show up at their address location. So you would see that there's a device at that particular address. And then from there, I could go off and I could program my, my I2C devices. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks very much for watching.